Late last week, we heard the news out of the 2026 United States Senate election in the state of New Hampshire that longtime Democratic incumbent Senator Jeanne Shaheen, a three-term Democrat, announced she would not be seeking re-election to a fourth term. And it got me thinking, is there a possibility that this Democratic primary in New Hampshire in 2026 could potentially be very, very competitive? And it got me thinking to the far, far past, otherwise known as September of 2024. I know, a far, far time ago. So long ago that it feels like an eternity, even though it was just 6 months ago. And it got me thinking about one very particular race, and that is the New Hampshire District 2 Democratic primary race for that district. So if you're unfamiliar with this, New Hampshire's 2nd District had a Democratic incumbent named Annie Custer, who has been representing that district for a while now, since I believe 2016. And she announced last year that she would not be running for re-election, leaving it to be an open seat. And that created a primary election for the seat on the Democratic side. The district, according to the Cook PVI, is Democrat +2. So even though the district will be competitive, the odds-on favorite to win that race would be whoever won the Democratic primary. And it looked like early on, the Democrat Colin Van Ostren, who did run for governor before against Chris Sununu in, I believe, 2016, he was also a campaign manager for Annie Custer the first time she ran her race and won the 2nd District. It was looking like he was going to be the winner of the Democratic primary as he got Custer's endorsement early, and he also got the endorsement of former New Hampshire Democratic Governor John Lynch. But then, the woman you may now know this name become more popular, Maggie Goodlander, ran for the Democratic primary as well. Her husband, Jake Sullivan, is a member of the Biden administration, and she quickly shaked up the Democratic primary, and things got very, very contentious between Van Ostren and Goodlander, with a lot of negative things being said about each other in this very contentious Democratic primary. As things got closer to the primary date, things started to slowly break away for Goodlander over Van Ostren, and Goodlander ended up winning the primary after being hard fought, and then she won the primary and went on to win the general election in November by approximately 6 points, 53-47, over Republican Lily Tang Williams. And it got me thinking about the 2026 New Hampshire Senate race. Because even though we've had two longtime Democrats in New Hampshire retire, it's not too often there are a lot of political retirements in one state. Happening in back-to-back election cycles is not all too common. So now the 2026 New Hampshire Senate seat, one of two, now has an open seat. And it's no surprise here that when you look at who the Democratic candidates have stepped up to run so far, it's really not much of a surprise. The candidate that everyone's watching is Chris Pappas. He's the U.S. representative for New Hampshire's 1st District. He's served since 2019, winning the 2018 election in the midterm elections against his Republican opponent, Eddie Edwards, and he's been subsequently reelected in every election up until now. He has publicly expressed interest in running for this race, and I know many in New Hampshire Democratic Party view him as the successor and heir apparent to Jeanne Shaheen. But Maggie Goodlander has also not ruled out running for this seat and has even expressed interest at times at running for this race. And that makes me really think of the 2024 Democratic primary for the House race. Let's go down the path of Chris Pappas versus Maggie Goodlander. I would think that Chris Pappas starts out as the favorite. He's been in Congress longer. He's probably more well known in New Hampshire than Maggie Goodlander is. But that's exactly how the last primary started before. Chris Pappas versus Maggie Goodlander, Colin Van Ostren versus Maggie Goodlander has a male candidate who starts out as the favorite to win, and then Maggie Goodlander comes in and potentially could win the primary away from Pappas. The difference is I think Pappas is a more formidable candidate than Colin Van Ostren. He's been around in New Hampshire politics longer. He's more well known. His family is more well known in New Hampshire. So I think Pappas starts out as the favorite over Goodlander. But Goodlander has very recent precedent of running in a Democratic primary that's probably going to get nasty. He's probably going to get contentious, but ends up winning the race. So a potential Pappas versus Goodlander primary could potentially make things very, very dicey and actually may even play into the Republicans' benefits depending on which candidate that they nominate. One note I also saw today, as right before I'm recording this video, is New Hampshire is considering moving their primary date, which typically New Hampshire, there's the presidential primary gets a lot of attention, but for other races like Senate, House, and Governor and such, New Hampshire's primary is one of the last in the country that happens around the middle of September. The state Senate and I believe State House in New Hampshire is considering moving their primary back to June, giving their candidates more time to campaign and for voters to get to know who they are. And in this contentious primary, that actually speeds things up a little bit because since this race is up in 2026, instead of being about a year and about another 4 or 5 months, it's going to be a year and about 2 months before we really start seeing things get moving. So this may expedite the process of Pappas and potentially Goodlander running for this seat. As for how this goes in the general election, if either Pappas or Goodlander wins, they're probably going to be facing off against either former Governor Chris Sununu or former Senator Scott Brown, both of which have expressed potential interest in running for the race. We're going to have to wait and see how it goes. Sununu has talked about running before, but ended up not running. I would bet Scott Brown definitely does run. Sununu, I think it's 50-50, but something says he seems a little bit more interested in running this time around than he has in the past. But I think if it is Sununu versus either of the Democrats, it really sets up a very, very close race. And whether it's Pappas or Goodlander, they both have their advantages, they both have their flaws in a general election. It would set up a very, very close race. But a nasty, contentious Democratic primary between the two could potentially give Republicans a lot of things to go off of in a general election against them that could potentially maybe give the Republicans a chance of winning. So I thought this was really interesting. I'm interested to hear what you have to think about this. Make sure to leave a comment below telling me your thoughts. But a Pappas versus Goodlander primary could potentially happen in 2026. And what fun would it be, especially if you're a fan of watching contentious primaries and election coverage like this. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to give it a like. Please remember to click subscribe, share with your friends and family, and I hope to see you in a future video.